In the last 24 hours, the diplomatic standoff in the Middle East has reached a critical pivot point. Iran has officially put a 14-point peace proposal on the table, delivered through Pakistani mediators. The core of the offer is a three-stage roadmap: a regional ceasefire and a long-term freeze on its nuclear program in exchange for immediate lifting of the naval blockade. It is the first time in months we have seen a concrete document aimed at de-escalation, but the optimism is being met with a cold reality from Washington. President Trump's reaction has been swift and skeptical. While acknowledging that lines of communication remain open, the president has labeled the current proposal not acceptable, signaling that the US is holding out for much deeper concessions. He has doubled down on his stance that the pressure campaign will continue until a total deal is reached. This creates a dangerous gap. Tehran is looking for an exit ramp, while the White House is signaling that the price of peace has just gone up. The volatility on the water intensified almost the moment the US signaled its next move. Within hours of the White House announcing Project Freedom, what it called, the massive Freedom Force mission to escort merchant vessels, reports of active firing surfaced. Iran's Revolutionary Guard claimed to have fired on a US Navy frigate near Jask Island, asserting that the vessel was forced to turn back. While Washington has issued a flat denial stating that no American ships were struck, the UAE has confirmed a serious escalation. An oil tanker was targeted and hit by 2 Iranian drones while transiting the strait. As these accusations fly, the physical reality in the Gulf is changing rapidly. The Freedom Force, with its 15,000 personnel and over 100 aircraft, is now officially moving to guide ships through these contested waters. While the mission is framed as a humanitarian effort to rescue stranded vessels, it effectively puts a massive US military shield in Iran's backyard. With warships and Iranian fast boats now operating in the same narrow channels, the margin for error has never been thinner. We are looking at a region that is simultaneously talking peace and preparing for the next phase of war, and nothing more could be dangerous. So, let's do a deep dive on what this means. Now, let's do a deep dive into the current situation. As we know that the war is dragging on, there doesn't seem to be any major breakthrough, and events tend to pick up a momentum of their own. So, where are things going now? We are joined by a very important guest today. We'll have a conversation with him and try and get his perspective. Mr. Erwin van Veen is our guest. He is joining us from Brussels in Belgium. He is a senior research fellow at the Klingendale Institute, where he also heads the Middle East program. He has also earlier worked as a security and development advisor at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is also the author of many books. Mr. Van Veen, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, it's a privilege. Thank you.
So you join us on a day when some developments are taking place. The Iranian news agency has said that Iranian vessels have fired on 2 US ships which were trying to sail into the Strait of Hormuz. The US CENTCOM has denied any such incident, but the Abu Dhabi, the UAE authorities are also saying that their ships have also been targeted by drones. So clearly a bit of a tension going on there. Is this, could this be the beginning of something very dangerous, or you feel that this is part of the attempt by both sides to try and find a better bargaining position?
Well, in my view, we never really left the danger zone after the Americans imposed a naval blockade, which went against the logic of the ceasefire that really sought to create more space for a negotiated solution. And the Iranians had even agreed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz just a couple of days before the blockade was installed. Some conditions, of course, to follow the navigational routes, plotted by Iran and with coordination with the Revolutionary Guard Corps. But nevertheless, it was progress. And this blockade, of course, raised the tensions, especially when it got more serious and when it got taken global by the US impounding several Iran-linked vessels. So what we see now is a variation on that theme, I think, where President Trump has just announced some vaguely worded scheme, basically, to get ships out of the Strait of Hormuz, presumably with US naval help. And Iran is basically signaling that that's not a good idea unless the Americans want a resumption of military activity.
The situation that, the way that I'm reading it, Mr. Van Veen, I'll just put across my perspective and I'd like you to respond to it. The way that I'm reading it is that whatever is coming out from Washington, D.C. doesn't seem to be very well thought out. And this is the latest instance of, what I'm talking about, this big announcement of the US Navy trying to help a ship stranded come out without any details, and it doesn't address the fundamental risk from the point of view of the ship's owners themselves, that all it takes is one little shot or one drone to completely demolish all ambience of safety. So why do you think the Americans are resorting to such vague kind of statements which really don't either promote their position or in any way communicate anything which would provide some sort of a safety to their allies?
Well, first of all, I think you're putting it very politely, but very correctly as well, in the sense that, it was clear that the Americans started this war without a plan, basically, other than the Israel-made assumption that the Iranian government would collapse after a substantial regime or government official decapitation, which is, we've seen the decapitation, but not the collapse. And this was predictable, I think, to many people with greater familiarity with Iran, including the CIA itself, which called this sort of Israeli fantasy farcical, if I recall it correctly. And to be totally honest with you, I think the US has never left that spirit or attitude or approach that the Iranian nuclear issue can be resolved by the application of coercion, so first military and now economic. And we don't seem to be seeing a lot of strategic thinking from Washington, which basically, underlines two things. One is that they are not yet at the point are willing to admit to themselves that, they basically embarked on a fairly reckless adventure without a plan B, essentially. And it also means, for us in the rest of the world, that the cost of this conflict will keep mounting, in particular through oil and gas prices.
The diplomacy is still going on, Mr. Van Veen, and I'm sitting at the place where most of the diplomatic activity is underway quietly. It hasn't made any headlines, but we do know that there's a lot of back and forth going from here, in Islamabad to Tehran, and then of course to Washington also. And we all hope that at the end of the day something does come out of it. Well, one thing that has come out of it is a new proposal that we've heard about, which was given by the Iranians to Pakistan, and Pakistan then sent it across to Washington. And President Trump has been pretty dismissive about this proposal, even though what we read about it, obviously it has not been made public, but what is being reported by credible news organizations, it does show that the Iranians are trying to be a little bit more flexible. But on the other hand, the Americans seem to be very dismissive of the whole idea of negotiation, even though it is very much clear to everybody, except perhaps President Trump, that they don't have too much leverage over Iran anymore.
Yes. No, again, I think that's a good way of putting it. We should, it goes back to my earlier point that I think the Americans have not yet managed to admit to themselves that they made a mistake and that they will have to pay a price for having made that mistake in the form of some concessions towards Iran. And that is very painful, of course, for President Trump, because he has always been the person who said he could do better, right? Better than President Obama, better than the nuclear deal of 2015, which incidentally resolve the problem that we are facing today, or that the Americans are trying to address by military force together with Israel. At least it would have put the Iranian nuclear program, the civilian program, and their architecture on hold for 15 years. So I think that the difficulty that we face today is how to reconcile different objectives. And this is also the challenge that the chief of the Pakistani army and his helpers will need to, try to bridge or mediate. So far, doing a great job, but success will be difficult to achieve, I think, as long as the Americans insist on their maximalist position and then throw in something like the naval blockade. So, like you say, Iran has shown a little bit of flexibility, but it stays close to its, core interest, as it has always done. But from the American side, I don't think we've seen any flexibility so far.
Well, I mean, yes, you're right. There isn't much flexibility. Perhaps there is some behind the scenes. We don't know. Perhaps the Americans are a little bit more reasonable in the back channel conversation that is going on. But if they were so, that would reflect some way or the other in the kind of diplomacy that is going on. Of course, knowing President Trump's nature, he might suddenly make a U-turn and say that, there's very good news and he's agreed to something. But whatever he has to agree to, Mr. Van Veen, of course, we do know that he has become a prisoner of his own rhetoric. He will probably have to pay some kind of a political price for this. And perhaps he's not ready for that. So what I'm wondering is that if that be the case and he doesn't have too much time, then practically speaking, he has only two options. Either to somehow walk back from his rhetoric and try and meet Iran halfway, or escalate. But is escalation actually an option, realistic option, or it's not?
Well, it is certainly a realistic option in the sense of feasible, given the amount of US forces that continue to be deployed in the Sea of Oman, the Arabian Sea, and the Persian Gulf. The question is whether to achieve an outcome that is materially different from when the ceasefire began on the 8th of April. So the way I can see it, there are basically three options for the US if it comes to military action. One is a limited strike. One is a more extended period of strikes, and the third is some sort of amphibious operation or maybe a ground offensive into Iran or the coast of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the first two are feasible, but that's basically doing more of the same and expecting a different results. The third is very high risk, not just to US naval and military assets, but also because Iran is guaranteed to reciprocate. And it could try to take out the Yanbu pipeline, for example, that crosses Saudi Arabia. It could work with the Houthi to close the Strait of the Bab el-Mandab, basically. And in the worst case, if it's really put to too much pressure, then it could destroy a lot of the Gulf energy infrastructure, right, on the southern littoral of the Persian Gulf. The results of all of that would be quite catastrophic for the global energy and economic situation. And I'm sure the Americans are aware of this and in fact pointed to it by their allies and their friends across the globe who are basically paying the bill of this conflict to a large extent at the moment.
So then, in other words, this escalation option is not really an option because the cost of that is so high for everybody concerned that it naturally becomes a non-option.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I would agree with you from a strategic, rational point of view, but this is not the decision-making style that we've seen so far from the White House. I mean, the whole start of this conflict was not based on solid strategic, rational analysis, with even the CIA being put aside, right, as a credible source of intelligence on Iran. So, I guess we should not underestimate the psychological factor that somebody like President Trump is basically surrounded by yes men and has difficulty to deal with setback that affects his personal pride, maybe his statements that he's made in public on how well he was able to deal with Iran or would be able to deal with Iran and so on.
Finally, I just want to, get your opinion on the sense that you're getting from where you're sitting in Europe, in the European Union. We recently had a very big event here in Islamabad also with the European Union, and there's a very big delegation here. So obviously relations between Pakistan and the EU are really improving dramatically in the last year and a half or so, that I've also noticed. But looking from your vantage point, what is the sense that you get of what senior EU officials are thinking about where all the situation is going, and do they have any say at all?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say two things probably. One is that, the fundamental problem for Europe, of course, or the EU in particular, is that it has a backseat on this conflict with very few levers that it can actually use to influence the outcome. So that's a bit the result of the geopolitical neglect of the Middle East and of the EU policy towards Iran after the Americans withdrew from the nuclear deal in particular. So today, basically, they're event takers, right? They have to deal with whatever comes their way, in particular, higher energy prices. So what it will do is it will hopefully accelerate the European drive for more strategic autonomy, right? So that means becoming less dependent on the US, having alternative energy sources, increasing its military weight, these kind of things. And part of that, I think, could lead to new partnerships. That I think that remains to be seen. A second effect, namely, is the fact that this conflict has a global effect of making a lot of countries think about the security reliability, but also the diplomatic reliability of the United States and the vulnerabilities that exist under the current government. So that they will reconsider some of their strategic choices, and that may lead to new and maybe unexpected partnerships and alliances.
Well, absolutely, and I think a lot of things will change once the war ends in all parts of the world, including ours. And obviously, Mr. Van Veen, you've been following closely how Pakistan has been trying its very best to try and find some sort of a way out, but the situation has become so difficult because of the position taken by Washington that I can sense a certain level of frustration here also. When we think that things are moving in the right direction, some statement or some Truth Social post comes and it just completely spoils the atmosphere. So, of course, it is also a very big challenge for Pakistan to somehow see this whole process through and hopefully find a way, help find a way out for all the parties concerned. We are very grateful for you taking out time and joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We will take a short break here. There's much more to come, so do stay with us.